maybe helping out. I don't think they need another set of hands, though. We'll see how that works. But if you guys have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand. I'll get right over to you, whether it's about the collections, about what's going on up here on stage. I don't know too much about, everyone's personal life, but I'll make something up for you. But for our late show, we are going to be doing something a little more complicated, a little bigger, a little fancier for you guys. How many people have seen a show today already? All right, how many people have never seen live glassblowing? As long as I'm not the only one, I feel better. All right, so we are going to be getting started. We started at 5 o'clock because the project that we have in mind is complicated, as I'll explain here. We are going to be doing a process that's called a stuff cup process. We're going to be putting patterns inside of patterns. The best way I can explain it is we're going to take a cup of a pattern and place it inside of another cup so that when you look through, you'll see 2 patterns layered. But we're going to do that 3 times. So the final project will have 3 different patterns in layers. Everyone following along? All right. Also, we are going to be live streaming this. So I will be rehashing a little bit as we go through the process. We've got some people following online. So bear with me if you guys are here for the whole show. All right. So what Michael just did is called a plunger pickup. This is one way of creating an unbroken pattern on the entire surface of our piece. Now, we call it a plunger pickup because you make a plunger of clear glass and you place it over a flat pattern. When we pick up the pattern, you have extra, and so we're going to be cutting that off. We're basically cutting this into a nice flat round circle so it's the same size as the plunger. We're going to be working on that for a little bit here. We will then take this pattern and turn it into a cup. And if you would like to see how that's done, that's awesome, because we're going to demonstrate it for you here in a little bit. So as we work on this, I'm going to talk to you a little more about the color and the pattern that we're working with. Now, can anybody see each of those little individual circles or patterns? You can kind of see a vague aspect of it, right? There's small circles creating a larger pattern. Each one of those is what we call Marini. Marini is a pattern in glass that's pre-made and looked at in a cross-section. The specific type of Marini we are working with is a twisted pattern cut and looked at in cross-section. We took, I know, it's a very hard pattern to describe without an image. Oh my gosh, we have a whiteboard. Hold on. So the difference between the pattern that they're working on now is that in each of the specific Marini, each one is going to be round. Now, if you're looking at the pattern that they were working on in a horizontal manner, it was long like this, and they took tons of lines and created a spiral pattern. Right? So each one of those lines spirals all the way around. So the inside pattern is going to look like this, with a clear section in the middle. That's a pretty good drawing of it, right? Yes, that's exactly what it looks like. All right. So each one of those patterns is the tiny little circles. That's what each Marini piece looks like. We've laid a whole bunch of those Marinis out to create the tile of color that we just picked up with our plunger. And as you saw there, they marvered or changed the shape of this into a cup. All of the clear glass that we're working with right now is not going to be a part of the cup that we will have for our final product for this cup. It is simply there to create this unbroken pattern. Now, the difference between picking something up with a plunger pickup like this and how we normally pick up Marini, which is in a roll-up, is you create a square tile, and then you would fold that all the way around to create a tube. When you do that, you have a termination point at the very bottom of your piece, which you can see stretches and changes how the pattern works. An example of that is this piece right here. You can see these were square Marinis that terminate in the middle, so it changes the actual pattern from square to rectangular. By picking something up with a plunger, that pattern doesn't have that termination point. It's just an even pattern of those circles that we're working with. This is the second cup that we will be making. We already made the first one, made it a bit larger, and we've placed it into this box sitting over here. We have a couple of these boxes on stage, and each one of them serves the same purpose. We just need them for the multitude of parts that we're creating to go together for this piece. So we made that first cup, put it in our pickup box. Our pickup box sits at 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And at that temperature, glass actually stops moving. That's the cold end that we work on. All of our furnaces are sitting at 2,100 degrees Fahrenheit. Slightly hotter, but that's how we're able to continue shaping the glass. So by placing that cup into our 1,000 degrees, it'll continue to hold its shape, as well as we'll be able to pick it up when we need it. I know Michael gave you guys a close-up view there real quick. Might have been a little too fast. I wasn't sure if you caught the pattern. Now Manolo is creating a punty. We're going to create several punties throughout this process. These are our secondary working irons. We're going to transfer this cup off of the blowpipe onto the punty. And this is where we will get rid of all of the clear that we're not going to want to work with. Centering it up to make sure everything's on the same axis. To break glass is actually a lesson learned in the entire process of learning how to make glass. How many people have broken glass at some point in their life, or watched their cat push something off of a counter? I'm sure everyone has. In order to break glass evenly, we control the temperature very specifically. Glass will break around 900 degrees Fahrenheit. That's why we try and keep everything at 1,000, because if it drops too low, the entire form can break or shatter. So when we want to break the glass like we just did, we can use a drop of water in one specific spot to cool the glass down. We can use cold metal to take heat out of that one section very quickly. But the important part is the tap on the pipe. That sends a vibration down the iron that will break the glass at that weak spot that we just created. Also, the jack line, which is the constriction that was created. That constriction tells the crack where to travel, so we guide the crack. Now, the difference between knowing how to break glass and breaking it evenly is experience. You can create a jack line, you can cool the glass down with a drop of water, but if you tap that pipe as hard as you can, you're still going to shatter the glass because it's still at a very fragile state. So you'll see this happen throughout the whole process when we transfer the piece from pipe to pipe. We will take every precaution during the punty transfer to control that break. Now this is fun. This is cutting through glass. We're using a set of what we call duckbill shears because the shears, you can see, look like a duck's bill. You'll realize we're very technical in the way we name all of our terms and tools. It's usually, what they're used for or what they look like, things like that. So our duckbill shears, they're very similar to tin snips, not so much paper shears or paper scissors. We need the big thick blades to cut through glass because whenever we use any of our tools, the heat transfers just a little bit from the glass into the tools, and if your blades are too thin, they'll heat up very quickly. So we use the thick blades like on our jacks. These tools are 2 steel blades with a little handle in the middle and a strap on top. And these are one of our more versatile tools. We'll use these to shape the walls, open up pieces. Now that we've made a little cup, we need to put it back on a blowpipe. So Josie made a blowpipe with a collar. That clear glass is used to make the pipe wide enough to fit the top of that cup. You can blow through that blowpipe. She opened up the end so that we now have a sealed bubble on the end of our piece, or the end of our pipe. And we could just leave it like this and blow it out into a beautiful vessel, and it would have one layer of that Marini pattern on it. But for the piece that we have in mind, we want more layers. So we're going to take this piece, create another cup of Marini, and then we will put those two inside of each other, basically, or put one inside the other. Now the important thing about the collar is that we've got that clear glass on the end of the blowpipe, and that needed to be the same size as the outside of our cup. And then we're going to work to make sure that those two pieces of glass are fully fused together, because we don't want this color pattern to come off of the blowpipe at all. So these tools are called blocks. And they are made out of wood. We're using cherry wood for all of the tools that we've got up here on stage, or at least all of the wooden tools. We use cherry wood and fruit wood specifically in glass blowing because fruit trees grow very slowly. They have a very dense grain pattern. They have a low sap content. If we were to be using something like pine, for instance, we would actually be shaping the tools with our glass instead of shaping the glass with our tools. So we need something that doesn't burn out very much or very easily. Also, we soak them in water. Now, this is just regular Corning tap water. It's not heated, it's not cooled down, but that water will turn to steam the instant it touches that hot glass. Keep in mind, it's around 2,000 degrees. So that steam actually separates the glass from the tools that we're working with. That's the important part. So as we use these wet tools, you'll notice we dip them back in water. We continue to add water to them. When the water turns to steam, that's actually called the Leidenfrost effect. If you've ever been cooking in a pan and you drop some water or oil in there and you see those little beads dance around, that's the same effect, same thing. So as we shape this bit up, are we going to be making the second cup too? Like out of that one right there?
Middle cup. Yeah. So middle cup, this is going to the garage.
All right.
And the last pick up the good stuff in the back.
So we are going to make this cup just a little bit bigger. When we work on any of our pieces of glass, even if we're not adding so many layers of color like this bit, we still think of them in layers, like an onion. You want to work from the inside out. So when we build the mass that we're going to be working with, we need to build it in steps. We're going to shape this, make sure it's condensed and stuck to the blowpipe, and then we're going to make it a little bit bigger. To collect glass initially, we'll go into our melting furnace, which is right in the middle of the stage, and we'll gather, which is just taking a little bit of clear glass out onto the end of your pipe. When we're working on any of our pipes, whether it's a blowpipe or a punty, we do have to preheat the tips of all of the irons before we pick them up. So they sit in this bit of equipment over here. This is our pipe warmer. Our pipe warmer sits at 1,000 degrees, preheating the tips of all of the irons, because hot glass likes to stick to pretty much anything else that's hot, including hot glass and hot metal. So we're just cooling this bit down. We're waiting for the glass to stop moving, to stabilize, so we can plunge it back into our furnace. This furnace holds 1,000 pounds of clear glass. And Josie will place that colored bubble below the surface, turning in one direction. She collects glass up and around and comes out with about twice, maybe 3 times the amount she was already working with. That right there is called a strip gather. She didn't want all of the material she collected. So by holding it straight up and down, that shows you a little bit of what gravity does. Gravity likes to pull that glass straight towards the floor. So we basically just poured off a little bit. We just wanted a clear layer on the surface of this cup. We do have a really great animation, if I could ask the AV team to pull that up, of what the inside of our furnace looks like. It's got a nice little cutaway that shows you the melting tank, which is our crucible. Right there, you can see the actual inside and what's happening when we gather. So that white pot is made out of ceramics. It's about 3 inches thick, holding all of our molten glass. And you just wind a little onto the end of the pipe. And that is what we do every time we need to collect more clear glass. We go back into that furnace. Now, on this stage at least, we have 1,000 pounds of clear glass so that we can change the color of the glass when we want to. We can add different patterns to it. You can melt an entire furnace of colored glass. But say we were melting cobalt blue, then everything we made would be cobalt blue. Every time we went into that furnace, everything would have a little layer of blue in it. So by melting clear, we're able to make a variety of different colors. So for this next stage, we're going to turn this into another cup. And this is going to be our middle cup, basically the second largest. We're going to place that into this box right here. This is our garage. Does the same thing as our pickup box. It also sits at 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, as Michael marvers, we're cooling the sides, we're shaping the bubble. The marver is just made out of steel. Marver does mean marble, and that's what they used to be made out of. They also used to be made out of bronze. But we use steel because it's cheaper, it's easier to haul around, it doesn't crack so easily. There's so many different reasons. But it does the same thing, cools, shapes, and the marver is a great tool because you can use more force turning with both of your hands on the marver than if you were to sit at the bench and try and turn with one hand and shape with the other. Now, we do have a large team up here on stage to help out. And you'll see everyone jump in and do their fair share as we go around, or as we go through this process. Once we get more glass on the end of the pipe and we're making a bigger piece, you'll see why we need so many glass blowers. Now, Josie's blowing into the pipe. She's helping inflate the piece. This is important because then Michael can actually control what's going on the other end of the blowpipe. Wherever we hold our tool, we're cooling the glass down just a little in that section. And this is how we shape the pieces. The glass will only move where it's hot enough. So if we have someone blowing through the pipe and someone cooling one section down, the only part that'll actually inflate is the part that's still hot, the part we haven't touched yet. This is a concept that we'll use in forming these cups and in forming the final piece as well. Now, that pad that he was using is made out of newspaper. And we are using the Corning liter because who doesn't like shopping local, right? We're only using about 8 or 10 sheets of it folded up into a pad. Now, they took the paper I had over here as an example, but I didn't believe the person who told me it was newspaper, and nobody usually believes us that it's newspaper. But we do soak it in water using that same steam concept as the blocks. You'll notice as we use it, it might spark a little bit, bits of it might fly off, but that just tells us we need to add a little more water. So we're going for another Punty transfer. The Punty transfer, or at least changing the axis of the bubble, allows us access to work on the top section. Because we need to make this into a cup, we're going to have to pull that top lip open. All of the equipment we're working up here on this stage, we're working in, at least is run off of natural gas and forced air. So we are working with a combustion flame to create the heat. Did anyone get a chance to go watch a hot glass show in our innovation stage? It's the stage that we have over in the front of the museum. That stage is actually entirely run off of electricity. So we've got 2 different types of fuel that we're working with at the museum. That's very different than what you would normally run into in any hot shop. This setup is going to be the norm. The usual is going to be a gas-fired furnace, like what this reheating chamber is. You can see we've got a couple of torches around stage as well. The torches help out when we need to introduce heat specifically into one area. So as we use it, we'll usually use the torch on the section that's closest to the pipe. That's going to be the coldest section of any of our pieces, because when we go into the reheating furnace, that's the last thing into the heat and the first thing out. It spends the least amount of time inside of the furnace. You can see the pattern a lot better from this angle with that backlighting. You see the spirals going on a little. Now, this pattern is unique to Marini in the fact that you couldn't actually get these spirals without first creating what we call cane. And cane is usually used to make more of a straight line pattern. We've got one example of it right here in our very large goblet. But many, many strands of cane can create the pattern that we have here. One bit of cane you can think of very similar to a number 2 pencil, where the lead is a rod of color that runs down the center of a clear piece of glass. It's stretched out across the floor and then broken up into about 4 or 5 inch lengths, and each one of those lengths is laid next to each other and twisted to create the pattern we're actually working with right now. Cutting through the glass again. Now that'll only work if your glass is hot enough. If you guys go home and try and take scissors to your wine glass stems, it's not gonna work. I don't recommend it. But when we are cutting through the piece, or even shaping just the top section, we're only really gonna heat the top 1, maybe 3 inches so that we can actually move those sections. We don't want the back end moving so much. If we had to heat this entire form to work on one very small section of it, the whole piece would be moving around and get a little out of control. So they're gonna finalize the shape of this cup, and when we're ready, we'll place it over here into our garage. The only difference between the garage and the pickup box is the fact that the garage is a front loader and the pickup box is a top loader. You'll see in a bit at the completion of our third cup, you'll see why we need the pickup box versus putting everything in the garage. Also, the garage has small doors. That's the easy explanation. So they're using the newspaper again. A lot of glass blowers really enjoy using the newspaper because it is the closest to using our hands on the actual material that we will get. Now his hand doesn't get hot when he's using that newspaper because of the water, because steam and heat rise. Your hand probably feels a little warm, kind of like holding a cup of coffee, maybe a little cooler than that. You can actually see inside the garage. That's a great view right there. So we're going to let this hang out. There is a flame on this side of the garage. There's a flame blowing that way. This is the hot side. That's the cold side, only by about 10, maybe 20 degrees. But that piece is still hot enough on the end of the punty to move a little. So we'll have someone in charge of making sure that glass doesn't fall off center, because if it falls too far, it'll hit the bottom of our garage and get a flat spot. Babysitting glass is just as important of a job as any of the rest of them, but it is an actual job. We do need someone to actually pay attention to what's happening on the end of this pipe over here. Now, if you guys have any questions, I'm not sure if I said this already, but if you do have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand. Don't feel like you're cutting me off. If you're tired of hearing me talk, go ahead and ask a question. But this is how we start all of our color patterns. They picked this up out of that pickup box, placed it on the end of one of our forks, and you can see that they've placed all of those little bits of Marini in a cross section in a nice little round circle. Now, because each one of those pieces of Marini is round, when you put a whole bunch of round things together, you have tons of little triangular gaps in between. We need to close all of those gaps so that when you blow through the pipe, your piece doesn't whistle and it actually expands. So they'll go through a process of squeezing the pattern down. I'm gonna take some heats through this furnace over here, and then they'll take 2 of our tools and kind of just push everything together. When you're working with Marini, if your pieces are too thick, the pattern will distort a lot more than if they're a lot thinner. And I think that's kind of what he's going for with this pattern, just a little bit. Because some of these pieces are pretty thick. So you get enough of that line pattern to create a spiral that covers over itself. Yeah. Yeah, like with the torching. Yeah, this is the Marini. Each one of those little bits is Marini, is a piece of Marini. And then we've got like 100 pieces of Marini. What is it? Marini is a pattern that you look at in cross-section. Have you seen the paperweights that we have in our paperweight collection, perchance? If you haven't, we do have an amazing paperweight collection, and inside of that collection, each one of those paperweights uses Marini. Marini is glass rods that when you look at them in cross-section have a pattern on them. Sometimes it's a face, sometimes it's a dog or a star. But what we're doing here is just a spiral pattern to look kind of like messed up spaghetti. Yes? Say it one more time. Yeah, do we demonstrate the process of making Marini? We don't, because they pre-made all of this pattern, but YouTube is amazing. There is tons of videos, and the Corning Museum of Glass actually has their own YouTube page. You can go, and I know we have tons of demonstrations of different artists, different techniques, and different styles. So if you were to look up Marini or cane pulling, you can look up either one of those, and that's what's going to be your best bet at finding one of those demonstrations. I'm sorry we can't demonstrate that for you here. Half the process of these shows is trying to show you as much as we can, but to make the amount of Marini they're using for this piece right here probably took a good couple of hours of prep work that they did a few days ago on the hot shop floor. And then once that glass all cooled, they had to cut it all up, pick all the ones that would work for this pattern. So it's a few days of setup just to get to where we can pick it up on the end of a blowpipe and actually make something out of it. When you're looking at pieces like Marini pieces or cane pieces, you do have to kind of add in maybe a day or 2 days of prep work that went in just to making the pattern, let alone the piece. So the squeezing process is just to make sure each one of those little bits is touching something else. Now, I have seen it done where somebody picks up a Marini pattern and one Marini wasn't actually touching anything, so there's actually a hole in the pattern. That's what we're trying to avoid. That's why we need to squeeze this down so much. Then they'll take a rough measurement of it, and Josie's already starting on our plunger. In glass blowing, timing is everything. It's very important that your assistants are on time with you. They know what you want before you want it. A really good assistant will be there with a tool you didn't quite think you needed yet. So Josie's working on the plunger, and she'll make a bubble and then open up the end of that bubble. So depending on which bench you're watching, I can explain what's going on either one for you. Now, did anybody get to see that right there? The bubble actually popped through. That's something you don't necessarily get to see all the time because we're working in clear glass right now. So when you are working in clear, you get to actually see that bubble form. By blowing through the mouthpiece of the pipe, she was able to trap a breath of air in there with her thumb. That air starts to expand, tries to escape. Following the path of least resistance, it pushes out into the glass, creating our starter bubble. This is also known as a parison. Now we do start, I would say 95% of our blown pieces like this, because you want to put a bubble into the small amount of glass so that that bubble doesn't have to move a lot of weight. Just moves a little bit. And you can make sure your bubble's on center, the walls are even. And then she'll cool this down. We're going to go through a process of gathering again, collecting more and more material. You can only collect a finite amount of material on every gather. And there is a reason we keep the furnace at 2100 degrees. If it was at, say, 23 or 2500 degrees, the glass would actually flow closer to water. We wouldn't be able to collect enough material on the end of our blowpipe for each gather. If we had it a little cooler, say 1900 degrees or so, the glass would be so viscous, it would be way too hard to turn your pipe once it got inside of the glass. So we figured out 2100 degrees is a perfect temperature to keep this type of glass at, to gather as much as you need, as well as then to sit down at the bench and continue shaping it. Yeah. Yeah, are the ovens always turned on? The furnace that we have in the middle, our melting tank, is on 24/7, and it stays on for like 6 years. Depending on how long the furnace goes without needing maintenance, it can stay on for between 3 to 6 years. And the ovens that we're working out of on this side, the two reheating furnaces, they are the same. The difference is the size. So the one we're working on over on the right side of the stage with Manolo, that one's going to be a little smaller than this one that we're working out of over here. But those ones we can turn off in the evening. They only take about an hour to heat back up in the morning, so the first person who comes to work lights everything up about an hour before a couple other people show up so that the furnaces are hot when we need them for our shows about an hour and a half later. This is the same in every shop that you walk into. They'll have furnaces for reheating, for working out of. There are some hot shops that have only one furnace, and it'll be your melting tank. You don't have to have a door on the front of your melting tank. You can actually use it like a reheating chamber as well, reheating your pieces just over that pot of hot glass. That's going to be how most melting tanks and most furnaces were created up until the invention of our secondary reheating furnace. If you go into our collections, you'll see an example of a wood-fired furnace where they had a pot of glass and they just reheated through the same hole in the same heat using that one fire. All of our torches and everything, they get shut off at night as well. But that is also going to be one of the biggest expenses in a hot shop, is keeping that melting tank on all the time. Yeah. Yeah, how do we refill the furnace? So as we work, we do drain glass out of the furnace. The level drops. It gets a little harder to gather when the level's lower because you personally have to get closer to that 2,000 degrees. He's going to poke a hole in the top of this bubble real quick if you guys want to watch him cut through some more glass. But to refill our furnace, we call it charging. And we actually have a shovel that we fill with clear glass and just shovel it in the front door that we pull it out of. The type of glass that we melt, we use nuggets. And that's because here at the museum, we don't want to use what is called batch. Batch is the absolute raw material of glass that's never been melted before, and it is about as fine as flour. Now, we don't use batch here because in order for us to use batch, we would need to be respiratory certified, and batch is so fine that it would float through the air, and we don't want to have you guys be respiratory certified to hang out in this room. So by using the nuggets, they're melted once into what looks like ice cubes, probably about 1 inch by 1 inch squares, and then we can just throw them right in the furnace and they melt. Also, when you melt glass for a second time, it takes less energy, so we don't have to turn our furnaces up quite so hot and so high. We just turn them up a little bit, melt all that new glass down. We do refill our furnaces at the end of every day because we make a lot of glass here for our shows. So we charge at the end of every day, and in the morning, we have a lot of fresh hot glass. We're going to go for that plunger pickup one more time. That's our price check, making sure everything's the right size, everything's the same size. And then they're going to go for their final heat. So Michael's going to make sure his plunger is hot enough to fuse, maybe not quite hot enough to move. We don't want that plunger collapsing in on itself. And then Manolo is taking a nice long flash. You might notice Manolo's got a glove on his left hand, and that's because that fork set can get really hot. So there we go, rocking it all the way around, making sure it's connected. And we're going to use this corn brush. This corn brush gets rid of all of that excess kiln wash. We are using a kiln shelf with kiln wash, just like ceramicists use. That kiln wash keeps the glass off of the kiln shelf. But sometimes you just pick up a little dust of it on the bottom of your Marini or your pattern, so that corn brush just gets rid of it. Yeah.
The quality of the glass increase if you use the squares of glass that you were saying
Rather than the original batch? Yeah. Does the quality of our glass decrease using nuggets versus batch? No, it doesn't. And it's made to be reheated again that second time. You can change the quality of your glass by how hot you cook it or how long you cook it. So if we have our melting tank turned up too high while we're charging and we leave it on too high for too long, you can actually cook out some of the ingredients. Most importantly, the flux. The flux in glass tells the glass what temperature to melt at. So for instance, our glass is a soda lime glass. It's one of the more common types of glass that you run into. It's what these windows are made out of. If you're wearing glasses, it's what your lenses are probably made out of. Now, soda lime glass is silica sand. Silica is the main ingredient in all glass. It's also the main ingredient in beach sand. But silica, soda ash, and limestone, those are the three main ingredients in our soda lime glass. Now, soda ash is our flux. That's what tells our glass to melt at about 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. If we took that out or you cooked that part of it out, the glass would become so viscous that even at 2,100 degrees, it would be very hard to collect, really hard to work with. it changed the entire way the material worked, basically. So by remelting those nuggets, no, we're not messing up any of the glass. It is designed chemically to be melted twice. Yes? Yeah, where do we get our original clear glass from? We don't make it here at the museum. We don't make our colors, and we don't make our clear glass. There are companies around the world that do that for us, which is awesome. There's about 3 companies that are the main companies for creating clear glass for what we call art glass or soft glass. And we're using Spectrum 96 premium nuggets at the museum here on this floor. And that's a company that makes that clear glass for us. You can get clear glass from Spruce Pine, North Carolina. You can get glass from New Zealand. There's a couple of other different companies as well. There's only about 3 of them around the world, though, that create the type of glass we're working with, and the importance of that is that the clear glass is chemically compatible with the colored glass we're working with. Now, there's also about 3 color companies around the world that create chemically compatible colors to work with our clear glass. Those 2 types of companies work very closely together to make sure all of those colors and clears are compatible. Otherwise, the entire business of, on our end at least, creating pieces would be very difficult if we could only buy one set of clear that matched with one set of color. So the color we're working with specifically, we buy our color from a company in Germany called Reichenbach. They create an amazing palette of colors that we can choose from. And we don't have our color card out here, but we do have a color card that looks like a giant spice rack with all of our colors on it. And you can pick pretty much any color you want. We've got at least 3 or 4 blues, greens, yellows, oranges. And it's really nice. Especially here at the museum, we have this amazing array. Now, color is the most expensive part of what we do. The clear glass is about $1 per pound, and the colored glass changes in price depending on what type of color you want and the market price for that material. The reason I say that is because of this color right here. This is our gold ruby. Gold ruby is also known as cranberry glass, and it does actually take 24 karat gold chloride to create that glass. So for us to buy that color, the price of it fluctuates with the market price of gold. And you'll actually see, at least in the glass world, when that market price dips, a lot of glass blowers buy their color so that they're getting it at the best price for them. Any other questions? Those are really great questions. Yeah. We're using Spectrum. Spruce Pine is also just a company. We get our clear glass from Spectrum, and we get our colored glass from Reichenbach. Yeah. And the Marini. The Marini is actually something that Michael brought with him, so I'm not sure what type of clear glass or colored glass he uses, but it's a similar coefficient of expansion, which is a rate in which the glass expands and contracts while we're working with it, while we're cooling it down and heating it up. So whichever company he's working with is definitely at least compatible with our glass, because we're taking those Marini pieces and coating them in our clear glass. The difference between each of those color companies is simply their personal color palette. They're using the same type of materials to create each of their different colors, though. All right, so we are on to making our 3rd and final cup. This will be the smallest cup. This will be the one that goes inside of all the rest of them. And all 3 of our cups do have the same pattern with the same color, but because they're going to be put together in layers, they'll have that different depth to them. And what he's doing right now, this is a Dremel. Sometimes when you pick up pieces off of the kiln shelf, you don't get to wipe off absolutely all of the kiln dust. And if you can't wipe off all of that dust, it will fuse to the outside of your piece. Lucky for us, you can just take a diamond bit on the end of a Dremel and grind off the little parts you don't want, and they go back into our furnace to fire polish that out. So those diamond bits do scratch the glass. They get rid of the parts that we don't want. And then when you stick it back in the heat, the glass heats up so much it just polishes itself out, and you get rid of all of those scratch marks. And because this is going to be the cup that's on the very inside, we want to make sure it doesn't have any bits of kiln wash on it. So all of that clear glass on the end of our blowpipe, I say waste glass because we aren't going to be able to reuse that glass. Usually if we have a clear piece and it breaks while it's cold, we can just take that glass, throw it back into our melting tank, melt it down, and make it into something else the next day. But if it has metal on it from being attached to the blowpipe, or if it's hot and it's hit the floor, it'll pick up dust or little bits of chunks of glass that we've got on the floor, and that's dirty glass. So that gets thrown into our color bucket. All of our colored glass does get recycled, but not in the same manner as our clear. Here at the museum, we sell our glass or give it to aggregate companies, so it actually gets turned into sidewalks, roadways, gets used as a bunch of different building material. If you didn't know there was glass in your roadway, that's probably why it hurts so much when you fall down. But we always like to say that while you're driving on the roads in Corning, if you see any of those little sparkles in the street, that's just all of our broken dreams. But they do get to go to a good use, right? So we're going to go through making this cup, and then we'll place this cup inside of all of the other cups. But we'll let you guys just kind of watch what's going on here. I'm going to ask the AV team if they can kind of turn the music up just a smidge. And I want you guys to just enjoy the process of watching some glass blowing. If you do have, let's say a final question. Yeah, actually, I could cover that. That's great. How are these particular glass artists here today? Well, Michael and Josie are actually teaching a glass class across the street. We do have the studio, which is the teaching facility associated with the museum, and it's just across the parking lot, and we've got multiple classes happening. Throughout the summer and winter, we hold different types of classes. This one is going to be a 2-week-long class, and jeepers, it just started Monday, so we've still got about a week and a half left in it. But as we have these classes, we like to bring the professors over, or the teachers, not so much professors. They're artists in and of themselves as professional artists, but they are teaching these classes. So we like to bring them over as a guest artist so that while they're here teaching a class, they can also come over, use this space, demonstrate something they may or may not be teaching in their class. I know Michael's very well known for his goblet work, and that's usually the classes he teaches. But this is going to be a little different than that. But yeah. So if you guys do have any other questions, hold on to them for a bit. I'll be right back on the mic. But I just want you guys to watch this for a bit. All right? All right, so we're gonna get ready now to stuff this bubble that we've got on the end of this blowpipe into the cup that we pre-made for our middle cup. Hence the name stuff cup. I warned you about our very technical terms, right? Okay. So when we do this process, we want to make sure that the inside bubble is hot enough to move, and the outside cup is just hot enough to fuse when we place the bubble inside of it. So Josie's got the cup. We're going to preheat this over in this furnace. It has been sitting inside of our garage this whole time at 1,000 degrees. Again, price check. You always do a price check, right? Before you commit. When we do a stuff cup move, you need the inside bubble long enough and skinny enough to actually fit, but then we're going to blow through the pipe so that it expands and fills that cup. We've set up some vermiculite rings over by our staircase on the far side of our stage. Those rings are a high heat refractory compressed into a square with a hole in the middle. And we'll break this cup that Josie has into the rings, and Michael can actually step up onto the stairs so that he can get over his blowpipe. Doing a strip gather like this is important before a stuff cup move because you need the temperature from that 2,000 degrees as well as a little more of the volume. There we go. A little bit of a shake helps get that mass down towards the tip. It is just pouring into a bucket of water. You might see that water bubble and boil over. I have heard of people cooking lobster like this inside of a vat of water that they just pour hot glass into. It's great. It boils your water immediately. There's a lot of different cooking things you can do in hot shops. So with the strip gather, with any gather, you're collecting that 2,000 degrees and allowing the heat to soak into that core bubble. The only time the glass will ever be 2,000 degrees is when it's inside that melting furnace. So we've got some Kevlar gloves. We're going to walk over to the vermiculite rings, placing that down, making sure the cup's straight up and down. If you notice, he touched the very bottom first, held his thumb over the mouthpiece and pushed so the glass expanded, and then we inflated the glass, and now we have a stuff cup, and that was amazing, as always. To watch a stuff cup like that goes so well is a treat. You can actually see the difference in the thickness of the second cup just through the hot glowing of the glass on the inside versus that colder cup on the outside. Now, the classes that I was talking about earlier, the reason that they are here today is for those classes at least, we teach a variety of classes over at the studio. I think over 20 to 30 different types of glassworking that you can take a class in. Furnace work is just one of those options. Within furnace work, you can take a beginning glassblowing class, as in I've never touched glass before and you want to try and gather. Or you can take a class specialized in goblet making or in Marini patterns and cane patterns. We also have classes that are on the cold spectrum. You can do casting in a kiln. You can do mold making. And we also have cold working. If you've ever heard of cold working and engraving glass, you can take glass once it's out of the furnace, once it's cold like this, and take a diamond embedded wheel. So it's a diamond grinding wheel, and you can carve patterns into the surface of the glass, just like Waterford glass, if you've heard of that or if you've ever seen that type of an engraved piece before. Does anybody have any questions about that stuff cup move? No? All right. It does make a little more sense once you see it happen, though, right? I'm glad you guys are all keeping on track. All right. So now that we've got one cup on the outside, we do have a bit of an overexpansion with the top of the cup. That's important. You don't want the cup to be half the length of your bubble. That would just ruin your whole piece. So by having the cup go up onto the moil. The moil is the glass that's still attached to the blowpipe, and that moil will eventually be waste glass. He's blowing through the pipe and trapping the air with his thumb. If you're looking at his right thumb, it's actually capped over the mouthpiece of the pipe. And that's stopping any air that's on the inside from escaping. So by blowing the air in there, trapping it in there, that air is trying to expand. It's pushing out against the glass. And as he marvers, it's giving an inside force along with the outside force of the marver. So we're really squishing those two cups together. Through this next set of shapes or steps in shaping, we're going to fully fold back the lip of that cup so it touches back onto the moil. Shape up the top section there. And I'm not sure if we're going to do another strip gather before we stick it into the final cup, but the third cup that they made is definitely large enough to hold this bit of glass along with maybe a little bit more. That right there is just water in a water bottle. If the clear glass that's on your moil starts to heat up a little too much or a little faster than you want it to, you can simply cool it down with some water. It's waste glass anyways. So if it gets that crackle pattern, it's fine. Consequently, if you've ever wondered how we get that crackle pattern into glass, it's simply by pouring water onto it. It is actually broken glass. It's also known as ice glass, and sometimes you see it on the bottom half of a bubble. They just took a very thick, hot bubble, plunged it into a bucket of water, and you can keep the crackle pattern on the piece if you want it, or if you melt it back in, you can melt that pattern out. And on this moil, that is what we are eventually going to do. The whole piece is going to get so hot that it doesn't matter that we just poured some water on that back end. If you are just joining us on the live stream, at least we have done one stuff cup. We're planning to do one more. And we have a double layer of Marini pattern on this specific bubble. So before we do the second set, or we stuff this piece into the third cup, it looks like we are going to separate this bit off onto another punty, put it onto a different blowpipe. And we're going to do that for a very specific reason. When we're working on large pieces of glass, we need to use equally large blowpipes. Glass, as it gets thicker, does get heavier. And when you're working with hot glass on the end of a very long blowpipe, the farther it is away from your hand, the heavier it feels. It's harder to turn heavy glass on a very skinny blowpipe. Over in our pipe warmer, we have a multitude of sizes of pipes so that we can make bigger or smaller items. And we're going to transfer this piece onto a bigger blowpipe. If we tried to collect 4, 5, or 6 gathers worth of glass on the end of this pipe, it could potentially bend. The way a blowpipe is made is they are made out of stainless steel. That's one of the reasons no one's hands are getting burned while we're working with them. So that heat travels maybe 6 inches up the blowpipe or so, maybe 8. And in fact, you can see a brown tarnish mark right between where the hands are and where the actual glass starts. That tarnish mark shows where the heat has been and where it will travel again. And it is very affectionately referred to as the hospital zone. Because if you touch it, you're going straight to the hospital. So as long as we keep our hands in that silver spot, we're okay. But a blowpipe has, the head of the blowpipe is about 4 inches, and it's a different section that's welded onto the body of the blowpipe that's welded onto the mouthpiece. Well, that weld, that's about 4 inches up the pipe, that does heat up and cool down, and if you you will weaken the pipe with all of the heating and cooling that blowpipes go through. So if you were to put too much glass or too heavy a bit of glass onto a blowpipe that was too skinny for it, usually they do break right at that weld, at that specific weak spot. So we're going to punty this one more time. And Josie's actually got the blowpipe. She's going to be making a collar on the end of it. And you can see that it is significantly thicker than the one that Julia's got over here. Are you just going to... Can you guys hear that whistling? There's the roar of the torch, and then underneath it there's a little whistle. And that whistle is simply from the air and the fire blowing across the hole that's created from the top of this piece. It's very much like blowing over a bottle, making that same hollow noise. It has no purpose, it's just a fun side effect. There's an amazing shot of that color pattern. And you can see how even though it's the same pattern and the same color, because of those different layers, we've got a lot more depth to the piece already. We're going to do this one more time. So this is going to be a very interesting pattern by the end, if it's not already. So as we start taking these different types of heats, we've got a really great view. There is a view of a camera sitting behind this piece of equipment. And that's our camera sitting and looking through a bit of fused silica. That fused silica creates a little lens, and pure silica melts around 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So that lens does protect the camera just a little bit. But that's also a view that you will only see here at the Corning Museum of Glass, because I do believe the museum is the only place bold enough to place a camera right next to 2,000 degrees of heat. But that lens is also important because fused silica was invented here in Corning in the 1930s. It's currently being used in a lot of fiber optics. Several different space programs have used it for the windshields on some of the Apollo shuttles. Some lenses and mirrors that have been associated with the Pluto photos. That fused silica is much more pure silica than what we're working with. It doesn't actually have any little extra ingredients inside of it. You might see little flames jump off the ends of these tools specifically, and that's because we're using a little bit of wax on the end of our jacks. That beeswax acts as a lubricant, allowing the metal to slide along the glass. If we don't use that beeswax on our tools, then we get a really nice noise that sounds like nails on a chalkboard. So not only does it stop that screeching noise, but it also allows the tools to slide, and it makes working with the glass much easier. So now that we've transferred this cup onto the final blowpipe, we're going to be able to collect the third cup and maybe even one more gather on top of that. At this stage, I would say maybe the blowpipe and the glass are about equal weight. Yeah. As we keep going, of course, we're going to collect more glass on the end of this. It's going to feel much heavier. If we were going to make this piece into a tall vase, the whole form would feel very heavy by the end of it, not just because we are using so much glass, but because of the shape. That much weight away from your hand is just going to feel very heavy. If we took the same amount of glass and made a low, wide platter out of it, it would feel a lot lighter because now all that weight is all of a sudden much closer to your body. You'll notice as we have a couple people start to lift this piece, everyone's lifting very close to themselves, lifting in a very ergonomic manner, trying not to hurt themselves while they lift a very heavy bit of glass. Also, as it's hot, it moves around a little more, tends to feel a little heavier. Having that bigger blowpipe, the larger diameter, it's much easier to grip onto and get your hands around so that you can actually turn the pipe. If you've noticed, the whole time we're working, somebody has been turning this blowpipe. It's passed hands a lot, but every time the piece of glass is being heated or worked on, or even just kind of stared at, we're rotating. That's one of the first things you learn how to do in glass blowing, is you build that muscle memory of just continuing to turn. A lot of times when you take a glass blower out to play pool, they'll pick up the pool cue and they won't even notice it, but they're going to find the balance point and then start to spin it. And if you've ever played pool, you understand those are skinnier on one end and heavier on the other. So they're nothing like our blowpipes, but it still happens. These heat shields are just as important as every other tool that we're working with. You'll see Julia jump in with it, just a wooden paddle. But a wooden paddle is enough of a shield to protect your hand from that radiant heat. The bigger the piece of glass, the wider field of heat it casts, as well as we get it hotter, when you stick your hand closer to it, it starts to burn a little. Some glass blowers will put on a sleeve to protect their arm. Those sleeves can be made out of cotton, socks, sometimes out of Kevlar. But it's just an extra layer between you and the heat. One of the most common burns a glass blower will get is just a radiant heat burn. It's like a heat rash, maybe a little more intense than, say, if you were trying to hold your hand over a fire, which I don't recommend. But if you have ever done it, you would know the inside of your wrist is the first thing to get hot, not necessarily your palm. So when we're working, you'll notice an assistant or somebody jump in there with a paddle to protect the person working from the heat. When marvering, we're skinnying up the piece, we're thickening the walls, squishing everything together. He's putting it into a shape that it needs to be in order to go into the next cup. So even as this piece starts to get a little longer, you'll notice the entire mass is moving because we are heating all the way back to the blowpipe. We do want to shape up the entire bubble. Back onto the newspaper. Now you can use any newspaper you want. A lot of glass blowers that work here like to use the financial section, mostly because it burns really well. But You want to use the least colored bits of newspaper. That colored the colored ink is not the best for working with our glass, so we like to use just the plain black print on the top. If you can get newsprint that has no actual ink on it, we're going to go for our price check right here. That's probably one of the best newsprints you can get. So there's our third cup. Just making sure it'll fit. We did make the cup earlier, somewhere around 5:30, so we wanted to make sure, after all this time, it hasn't shrunk. Now, when we put the cup into the oven, you want to make sure it's straight up and down because we're going to be going straight in like we did the time before. And we have our convenient set of stairs to allow us to get up and over the pickup box. That connection that he keeps cooling down is going to be one of the weaker spots because it's basically going to act like a hinge. So we keep cooling it down to stabilize it. It does look like they might go in for one more strip gather. We want to get that 2,000 degrees of heat as well as a little more mass. By also adding in that layer of clear in between each layer of the pattern, we're just adding to the depth that this piece is going to have in it. Going in for one more gather. You can see how much more glass we can gather each time we go back in. If he were to hold this straight up and down for too long, the glass would actually start to pull off some of that color if it got all the way down into that layer. Yep, just like that. Keep pumping. It's like a little water fountain. All right. You all right, hon? That was supposed to happen. All right, so now that we've got our strip gather on, they're going to shape it up just a little bit more. And that heat's going to start to soak in to the core bubble. When you go for a heat right after you take a gather, it's just adding more heat into it. It's infusing more of that glass on the center with the 2,000 degrees of our furnace. We try and keep our reheating chambers maybe a little hotter, 2,300 degrees. It helps us to heat the glass up a little faster. And because we are working with a combustion flame, we actually have a flame inside of there constantly filling that furnace with heat. As we open the doors, it does let a little bit of that heat out. Here we go for the final stuff cut. beautiful, and it looks like we've got that one just as well as the first one. Did you guys notice that pattern stretching? That's that glass falling. You want to let it stretch and fall all the way to the bottom of the cup so it fills from the bottom to the top. Because of the type of pattern we're working with, we don't have a hole at the bottom of this cup. Sometimes when you do a cane roll-up, you'll leave the very bottom of the cup open so that you can actually squish air out through that little hole as well as up towards the blowpipe. We're going to just start to torch this a little more again, adding more heat in. You can overheat the glass if they were to get this so hot that they couldn't control the turning rate or they couldn't control that entire weight on the end of the blowpipe. It would start to fall off the end of it. Now it looks like this did crack just a little bit, but that's fine. You just heat it back up, you can glue the glass back together. So they're going to work on that. Glass blowing is a lot about not just what you can make, but what you can fix. Every step of the process of making something is reacting to the material. The glass does want to do whatever it wants to do, but as we heat it up and as we want to make it into different shapes, that's where the length of time you've been working with something and your skill comes in handy. So you'll see them start to close up these doors just a little bit, keeping in the heat. Of course, they don't want to lock him into the furnace, so they'll keep opening the doors. Now to squish the glass back together, we want to heat and marver it. If he were to just sit in there and try to heat that shell, because it's got a few cracks in it, the pieces would just start to peel up away from that layer on the inside. So by heating, marvering, we're heating that glass, making sure it's fully fused together, heating it again, and continuing with the process. So now that we've got most of our color pattern done, and we're going to be then starting to inflate this piece and shape it. This is a bit where the teamwork comes in handy. So this move is cooling the tip where he marvered it, shaped and cooled that one section, and then just inflating it a little more. When you do marver the sides, you're squishing that bubble on the inside. We need to keep that bubble open and shaped up so that it doesn't collapse completely. We do eventually want to inflate this into a vessel. So as he marvers, he'll start to blow through the pipe a little more. Hanging it off the back end of the marver, that's just a much easier way than transitioning this piece from the heat to the marver to the bench. You just stay right where you are, shape it up, and create the moves that you need. As we're working on this piece on the marver, the table will get hot. Something I've seen really only happen in beginning glass blowing classes is that someone will use the marver and then somebody else will try and use it as a stool and they'll sit on it. And they pop up real quick because that marver is nice and hot. The good thing about having such a thick metal table is that that heat dissipates very quickly, so the tool doesn't stay hot for too long. So because at this stage we're adding in our jack line, I'm just going to guess that we're not going to gather over the top of it. And you can also tell because they've blown it up so much, so it's getting so much larger. This constriction, as we've been using on any of our other cups or any of our other pieces, is really vital to eventually breaking this piece off of the blowpipe in one piece. Without a jack line, if you were to douse a bubble in water and tap on the pipe, it wouldn't just break, it would shatter, very much like when you knock something off the counter or break it at home. And glass does break in an uneven pattern because of its actual structure. It doesn't have a crystalline formed structure that's even throughout the whole form. The actual scientific name for glass is amorphous non-crystalline solid. It's a whole lot of words to describe this material, but amorphous is because glass is in fact a solid. No matter how hot it is, it just changes the form in which it is a solid. But that's amorphous for you. Crystalline, amorphous non-crystalline means it doesn't have that continuous pattern that happens through it. So when it breaks, it shatters in an uncontrolled manner. This is also where tempered glass comes in handy. Tempered glass, like on the windshield of your car, is heated up and cooled down in such a way to create so much stress within the glass, pulling against itself, that when it breaks, instead of breaking into large chunks, it breaks into very small, almost square-like pieces. So as we break our glass with the jack line, and as we break it pretty much in any time that we're working with it, even if it's off of the punty, we are trying to control that exact non-crystalline form. The shape that we're going for, he told me, is going to be a bit of a bowl. So it'll be a nice open form that will display all three of those layers. No matter whether you're looking at the side of it or from the top of it, you'll be able to see each one of those Marini patterns stacked on top of each other. And even at this stage that we have a nice round lollipop looking thing, we could shorten it and make it a low wide platter like the tops of some of these pieces that we've got. Or if we heated the whole form and hung it down towards the floor, you would stretch it and make it much taller. Back on with the newspaper, we're inflating the glass as well as controlling it. When you make that jack line, it becomes a small hinge point, so the whole bubble will start to move on just that one section if you heat it too much. So when we go back in with the newspaper, you can see him centering that back section, making sure it's all running in line with the pipe. So this looks like it's going to be the final punty. And we just used some chalk to scratch onto the bottom of this piece that tells us exactly where center is. When we look at a low, wide horizon, basically, when you're looking at it, you can only see center from left to right. You can't see center from front to back. So when we place something right in the middle, you can get it on center in two axes, but you need it on center on the other one as well. So scratching the bottom with a sharp bit of glass will score in a circle. You can just melt out that score, or using a little bit of chalk also marks it. The chalk will actually just brush right off when this piece is cold, so after we cool it down, we can clean it and wipe it off. The type of punty that we're creating is going to be in 2 layers. We want the core to be cold enough to where it stops moving, also to create a wider form, a wider punty base. When we go for a flash, you can see a really nice close-up view of that pattern with all 3 of those layers in there. So bringing this over, Manolo cooled down the sides of the punty. We've got a lot of meat or a lot of clear off of the ends. We're going to place that right into the middle of that scratched circle. This tag is just a metal paddle cooling it down. We want that punty to be secure, but not hot enough to where the piece starts to wiggle when we break this away from the blowpipe. Now, to break this off evenly, we're adding a little bit of a jack line. This is called a sculpture punty. When we break the punty away from the bottom of this piece, we're going to have a little chunk of clear left on the base of our bowl, and we will cold work that later. In the same way you can grind a pattern into the surface of a piece of glass, you can grind to a fine polish the bottom of a piece to get rid of a punty like this. And that's called cold working, simply because it's done when the piece is cold. A little cold metal, drops of water. Beautiful transfer. Are there any remaining questions at this stage? All right, cool. Oh, yeah. Yeah. When this piece is finally cool, will you be able to see it? We do try and post photos of the pieces that we have for our live stream demos. And since this piece is live stream, you should be able to at least go on to the museum's website. The museum's website is cmog.org, and they'll have this video of the live stream on the website as well as on the YouTube video or YouTube channel. And at the very end of this, we should have a final look at the piece, or you can, partner up with other people in the crowd and they'll send you a photo. This piece of glass will take a while to cool down. When we anneal or cool any of the pieces that we make, we'll anneal them for a minimum of 10 hours. And the length of time is decided by the thickness of the piece, not necessarily the size. If this piece was this big and solid, it would take much longer. We do have a piece of glass in the museum that's one of our paperweights. I think it was the 1,000th paperweight we have in our collection. Did you guys get a chance to see it? It's a big, solid paperweight with a little ocean on the inside. And that piece took a few months to cool down. Did anyone get a chance to find the large telescope lens? It was the first casting of the Palomar telescope lens. It is the largest piece of glass we have in our collection. It is one casting of solid glass, and that one took 11 months to cool down, just under a year to cool down. And if you haven't seen it, it's about 5 meters wide, and it's in the Innovation Center, and it's the large bit of glass that has a honeycomb pattern all around the outside. That piece was cast into a large mold in a room that they built specifically for that mold. And when they first poured the casting, the mold cracked while they were annealing it. only a few months into it. They cooled it down anyway just to test how long they would need to anneal the piece for. And because the piece we have in our museum is cracked, they made a second one. The second casting was successful, and that is currently the lens that is in the Palomar telescope in California. It is, to this day, still the single largest casting, the single largest single casting of a lens. Most of the lenses that are bigger than that one now are going to be piecemealed together and ground to a polish, so you can't have those seams and they don't interfere with the lenses. That Palomar telescope lens also then took 7 years to polish. Just fun fact. So we've gone through, we've tweezed and trimmed a little bit more. Every time we do that, we want to pull the glass just a little thinner. So when we're tweezing, we're actually stretching the glass about 1 inch behind where those tool marks are. And you'll notice when he goes in to cut the glass, he's not just cutting off the tool marks, he's getting back into that thin section. Now this can be to cut off the pattern where it might be a little wonky. This can be to make sure that the cup has a definite even lip. Sometimes if you do a stuffed cup and you're just doing it once, your cup might not be big enough to meet all the way up to the blowpipe. So when you get to this stage, you could trim off that extra little bit of clear glass. It's one way to save a piece if you make the cup just a little too small for the bubble that you have. And as we start to open this, you'll notice they'll jump in with some paddles. We use the dry wood at this stage because we don't want to introduce too much water into the piece. As we finalize the form, even a bead of sweat dropping off of the tip of your nose in the wrong spot can crack the piece of glass. This is something a lot of glass blowers are very conscious of because we've all done it once or twice. When you have a large, wide form like this, we usually torch the back section where that punty connection is, because when you stick it into the furnace, to get that heat all the way around the form is a little more difficult. It takes a little more time. You might need to heat the piece a little too much or more than you want. So we just use our fluffy torch. It's also known as a weed burner. Personal preference as to what you call it. This tool is called a soffietta. It means little breath or little puffer. And the cone seals the hole. And Julia will blow through the pipe or through that little handle and inflate this piece of glass. So we're rounding out the top section, inflating the shoulder. Soffies can be used to change the wall thickness, to change the shape, mainly to inflate the piece of glass when it's off of the blowpipe. We're switching over to some of our parchofis. Parchofis are these tools that have a wooden dowel. The wooden dowel helps to shape the glass because the tips of the parchofis are round. If we were to use the sharp pointed jacks to shape the glass like this, it would scar the inside with rings, and we don't like to leave tool marks on the pieces that we make. Plus, the wood allows a much longer working time. We can have parchofis that are made out of graphite as well. That graphite keeps the dowels from changing shape. Even though we are working in wood that's soaked in water, the wood does eventually burn and our tools might change shape or burn out a little too much. So we can replace those wooden dowels with new ones, and that's an easy fix. But when we're working with graphite, it keeps the shape of the tool, but it also cools the glass down very quickly. You can see those flames making him look extra awesome. He did put on a long sleeve shirt. At this stage, when working in bowls or in these wide open forms like this, you want to wear a sleeve. A bowl will work very similar to a speaker in the fact that it pushes that heat straight out through the opening. So if you're reaching your arm around the front of it, you're just exposing the inside of your arm that much more. We're going to start to work outside of the bench now, and you can see that as the piece gets a little longer, a little bigger, it's just a little too hard to reach all the way around it. This can also happen if you're working on a piece that's very tall. And you simply just step outside the bench and have your assistant turn for you. But on this step, it's important that you and your assistant are working together. You want the turning rate to match the pressure that you're using to shape the bowl. And you want those heat shields to protect you from those flames. So because we're using the parchofis, you might notice he is using the tips of them all the way on the inside of the bowl. So if you're looking through the wall, you can see that the tips are touching the other side of the bowl. So we're shaping a little bit of that back section as well as the opening. Whenever you're making a bowl like this, you want to make sure that the opening stays a little closed. Once the lip flares out too wide, you can't get it back in. So we'll shape the back section of the bowl, we'll shape the shoulder, which is the widest part, and then for the final move, we'll open the lip to where we finally want it to be. So we are slowly but surely working on that back section. And if you can see, it's slowly getting a little wider. If we were to try and open this bowl in one heat, in one move, we wouldn't get the shape that we're going for. To make these really shallow bowls is very difficult. You have to work inch by inch from the center of the bottom out towards the lip. If you have seen some of our other shows today, you might have seen us open pieces using a little heat, gravity, centrifugal force. But if we were to spin this piece out, it could get much wider than what we want for the final form. So by slowly opening it, you can control exactly what each section of the wall is doing and make sure it looks how you'd want it. Since we are working on our medium-sized reheating furnace, we still have one door left we could open up. We could make this wider if we wanted to. But the furnaces that we're working in limit the size of pieces we can make. If you can't get the piece back into the reheating furnace to make it any bigger, that's as large as it can go. So Eric is putting on his Sunday best. He's getting all suited up in our silver suit, which tells me we're probably getting close to the end. The silver suit allows us to hold on to very hot pieces of glass and place them into our annealing ovens. When we are finally done with this piece, we will place it into one of these large black boxes on the side of our stage and cool the glass down. Now this piece, I'm not sure how long of a cycle they'll put it on. It will probably be somewhere between a 14 or 16-hour cycle, which means that the oven will be at 910 degrees when we put the piece away, so it'll absolutely stop changing shape. And then it'll hit 720, 340, and then turn off to go to room temperature. But that entire time will take between 14 to 16 hours. Using the newspaper on the outside, as he spins faster, that glass flares out a little wider, and he can catch the glass with the newspaper and shape up that last couple of inches. All right, so we're going in for our last flash. When we want to break this off of the punty, we're going to use a little more thermal shock, some cold metal tools right on that jack line, a tap on the pipe. Eric can hold this piece in the Kevlar gloves for maybe a minute before he really starts to feel it. We do need to preheat the Kevlar gloves, especially at this stage. We don't want to introduce anything cold to the glass right now. So we angle that up so that the water, when it falls, doesn't fall onto the piece. It falls onto the punty and down the pipe. A very gentle tap. It breaks it at that jack line. We can come over to our annealer, placing that away. And an amazing demonstration by Schunke Josie Gluck, the hot glass team.